Welcome to The Business Strategist, the show for CEOs and founders ready to scale fast, lead smarter, and build a business that doesn't rely on them. I'm Adam Strong, award-winning strategist, former elite athlete, international speaker, and 3 times best-selling author. After 3 decades in business, I know exactly what it takes to grow, scale, and exit with impact. Each week, I dive into real conversations with industry experts, bold entrepreneurs, and clients navigating the uphill struggles of business, giving you the tools and the strategies to create more profit, more freedom, and more impact. Let's get into it. Hey guys, I just wanted to take this opportunity to make you aware of a brand new tool that we've just created called the Exit Readiness Assessment. Now, it is for founders and CEOs that are looking to exit from their business operations. Now, it doesn't matter even if you're not looking to exit right now, I would highly recommend to go and take the assessment straight away. It helps you to identify areas in your business that you need to work on to help you towards that exit strategy. And at the end of it, you get a personalized report on some of the areas that you're doing particularly well in and some of the areas that you need to make some improvements to. Make sure you head over to readytoexit.scoreapp.com. That's readytoexit.scoreapp.com. Enjoy. What if I told you that you are the problem? That every fire that you put out, that every deal you close, every decision that you make is actually killing your business. Now, stick around today because today we're going to be basically blowing everything that you know about growing your company, okay? Because we have the amazing Bill Flynn in the house. Now, if you don't know who Bill is, he used to be the VP of sales 8 times. He survived 2 IPOs. He was part of a restructure in a rescue business in the 2008 financial crash. He was part of 7 acquisitions as well. He's also pitched to people like Steve Jobs and collaborated with the likes of Alan McNally and also Amy Edmondson, and is part of the Marshall Goldsmith Coaches 100 community, which I'm a big fan of course. He's got a best-selling book called Further Faster, and there's another one coming out in October 2026. And you know what's really interesting, first of all, I want to give a big shout out to our good friend Morag Barat, because Morag has kindly introduced Bill to myself. And you know what was really interesting is we got on out like a house like fire. So without further ado, Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Likewise. This is going to be fun. Before we get cracking, Morag, great person. She introduced you. How did you guys meet, just out of curiosity?
We met at a pool table.
Love it. Literally a pool table. Yeah.
Yeah. So for a couple of years, Marshall lives in Nashville, and he wanted to get people together. And so we went to this local university. I think it's called Belmont University.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd stay at nearby hotels. And she was in my hotel, and I was playing pool with Chester Elton and a couple other people. And she came over, and we invited her to play, and we just got chatting. I mean, I knew of her and said hello, but you know, we played for like an hour.
Wow.
And we just had a great conversation, got to know each other. And then we, met a few other times, and we've just really connected. She's such a wonderful person, and so bright and interesting and funny. And, so who wouldn't want to hang out with Morag there?
Absolutely. And for you guys that are listening in, by the way, if you're a bit unfamiliar with some of the names, if you're a regular listener, you probably will be familiar with Marshall Goldsmith, the number 1 executive coach in the world. Morag Barat, actually, we had on the show about 4 weeks ago, Bill. We've also had Chester Elton, who we collaborated on a number of times as well. Again, a New York Times bestselling author. So for you guys that are certainly into leadership and management, make sure you go check those guys out, because they are real big thought leaders in their industry. I'm really looking forward to today's show because there's a lot of things that you're doing. There's a lot of things that I'm doing, and we're kind of like where we're fishing in the same pond, but there is, I think, kind of what got me interested in you is not only your useful insights and thought leadership, but also the fact that you've kind of seen these observations and seen these different patterns in your 30 years of experience in the business world. But I'd love to kind of start off with a question, if I may. So today is all around like why you are the problem, and your book is called the hero trap, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
Very cool. Love that. Now, I know that for some of the listeners that are listening in whether it be in leadership, consultancy, whatever it might be, but it's going to, well, it's going to hit a nerve more than anything else, I think,
Yes, it is.
especially with a lot of our listeners, right? Now, you've worked with, what, hundreds of founders from all over the world.
Yes.
You've seen what happens. What made you decide to just say it like it is and not just be like, those generic thought leadership coaches? And, there are a lot out there, right? The Care Bear fluff and that kind of stuff, right? But I'd love to, again, get your thoughts about this, and purely because of your background and experience, I'd love to start there.
Sure. So, I am a self-proclaimed iconoclast. And so what I've been thinking about and really looking into for almost all of those 30 years is, so we've been doing this for 50 years, 60 years, right? We've been doing this leadership development thing.
Yep.
And if you look at the metrics to show whether things work or not, it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Engagement numbers have not really moved
Mm-hmm.
in 30 years.
Right.
CEO tenures are actually shrinking. Being on the Fortune 500 in the 50s and 60s was, 60, 75 years. Now it's 12 to 15.
Oh, wow.
So, I think we should do something else. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm coming at. Yes, I think I'm going to, I think I'm going to make some friends not so friendly with me anymore. Because, and by the way, I'm not saying that it's wrong.
Right.
I'm just saying we haven't gone far enough. We haven't. Leadership development is how you create followers. But
Mm.
followers isn't the answer. You want members. You want people who feel like owners
Yes.
and will act on behalf of the mission and the vision, not on behalf of the person. And, you said a bunch of other things there as well as, how do we get here and that kind of stuff. And we'll certainly get into that as well. But that's sort of where I'm coming from. Is I just think it's a shame that really good ideas, really good people, really good businesses struggle or
Mm.
fail for
Mm.
completely preventable reasons. And I'm not professing that I have the answer, right? But
Mm.
I am looking at it, I think, differently than many, many people are. Not everyone, but many.
It kind of reminds me of a recent conversation that I had with another guy, actually from the States, and his name was Barry, actually. So his background was in HR, and his big controversial, I suppose, statement, if you want to call it that, was very similar to what you've kind of recognized, which is all these personality tests are just scams, right? They don't move the needle, right? It kind of reminds me a bit like what you're saying. All these self-proclaimed leadership programs and nonsense, what you're saying is actually they're not actually creating results. They're actually creating the reverse of the results, which is stagnation, right?
Yeah. And, so I think the problem starts when we're young
Mm.
because the people who get to where they are, right, these leaders of companies, they did well in school. They were always the champion. They were always the hero. They were, and they were looked towards for the answer and to solve the problem and to make the decision. And they got moved up, right? And they kept going. And then, but what happens is, especially in this world that we're in, which it's moving. We say this, it's sort of trite. It's a bit of a trope, but it's really moving fast, right? I mean, complexity is increasing. We've got all these things that are sort of invisible forces that are working against us. And that hero mentality doesn't scale in that world. You have to create an environment where you're pushing everything out to the edges so you can react. Planning is fine. I think we should plan. But, you know, it's another cliche, right? That everyone says, the whole Mike Tyson thing, right? It's a great good plan till you get punched in the face, and that's what happens, right? Is that things happen without you being aware, and you're doing things exactly the way you've been doing and has been working for years or decades. I think SVB is a great example. It's probably the most stark example, and it's more recent. They did something that they've always been doing. They informed their base what was happening, and they said we're going to fix it, etc. But Peter Thiel didn't like it. And he just said, I'm pulling my money out. And $43 billion was removed in 24 hours.
Wow.
That was unheard of, right? They went into receivership in a few days and they were bought by a smaller bank. And by the way, they were still healthy. And the reason I know this is my partner works for SVB. And
Uh-huh.
I was in Mexico on vacation with her when all this happened. So I was
Wow.
sitting, listening to these phone calls going on, and they were just overwhelmed and just shocked. And, this is sort of it was incomprehensible to them, which is this world that we're in. There's something called BANI, which is brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. That's sort of the world that we're in these days, right? With AI and all sorts of other stuff. So a hero gets you so far, and being a great leader is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but I
Right.
don't think it's enough anymore. And that's sort of where I wanna shake people by the shoulder and say, look, we got to do more than we're doing, because whatever we're doing isn't working well enough yet.
It's interesting. So I guess then my thought goes through my mind is that, okay, so you work with over 300 companies, you've worked with startups, turnarounds, IPOs, all that stuff. I guess my question would be is like, so walk me through, like, when was the actual time within your 30-year business experience, if you want to call it that, right? When was through that journey, when did it really start showing for you? Like, was there a big epiphany? Did you wake up one morning and think, shit, like, we need to do things differently? Or was it kind of like, what was the feeling that you kind of experienced? Like, when was the time? Or has this been
Yeah.
kind of like very recently? Like, give us this, I'd love to know what the lowdown is on this one.
Sure. So good. You're leading me right into my story, which is, so it's
Uh-huh.
January 4th, 2009, and it
2009.
was
Okay.
the worst and the best day of my professional life.
Uh-huh.
I had this was between startup 5 and 6, and I had been so I took some time off between them, because my family came to me and said, "You really need to do another one." And I was 5 for 6. I mean, I was eventually 5 for 10, but I was 5 for 6. I mean, which is unheard of. That's an
Uh-huh.
85% hit rate in startups, which is just crazy.
That is crazy.
And so I took some time off, and I was asked by friends, can you come and help? I heard you're free, et cetera. And so someone said, "Hey, I've got this guy. He wants to sell his business. Can you come in and help him out?" So I went in. I said, "Hey, happy to help. Here's my Here are my parameters. Right, I'm only working from 10 to 2 Monday to Thursday. You okay with that?" Right, that's my time. Right, because in the morning I bring my daughter to school, then I go to the gym, and then I'll work for you, and then at 2 o'clock I go pick my daughter up, and we go hang out and have fun. Right, and she
Sure.
was, I think, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 at the time.
Yeah.
And so he was fine with that. And so I helped him out. And about a year later, he sold the business. And I actually kind of liked the business. It was an email hosting company before Gmail and Office 365. It was actually the precursor to Office 365.
Okay.
And I thought it was a cool business. I really liked what we did. But that day, the entire technical infrastructure collapsed. And it was my first day as general manager. I was asked to take over the division by the company that bought us. And now they had already had a plan to fix the infrastructure, but it was sort of a longer plan, and now they had to accelerate it. So I was lucky enough to have a resource that could take care of that. But I had 60 people, I had thousands of customers, I had partners, I had all these things, and we were getting yelled at on a regular basis. And so I said, okay, what am I going to do? And I said, look, I know I've read a lot of books. I had some really great CEOs, and so I cobbled together what really turned out to be my version of EOS.
Okay.
I wasn't smart enough to know that EOS was an option, so I unfortunately made my own, but it worked great. We had 5 or 6 of us on the leadership team. I said, look, I'm running the entire division. I said, I am technically adept, but I don't know anything about network infrastructure. I've never been a finance person before. I've never run customer support. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I can tell you what I would like it to look like when we're through. And I'd like us to discuss, debate, and decide that. And then once we do that, I need you to tell me what you need from where you are to getting us there. And then we're going to work together as a team to make it happen.
Mhm.
And it worked phenomenally well, Adam. I mean, it wasn't quite while I was there, but the business doubled in size in about 2 years.
Okay.
I didn't lose one employee. Our rankings for NPS was kind of a thing, but not quite a thing yet. So I didn't do
Mm.
that, but I did
And
something, a version of that. Our rankings went up from about 58% to 92% on that. All the numbers were great. But the best part of the whole thing was when I left and I went to go do the next startup, 2 of the people that I worked with came to me and said basically the same exact thing. It says, that thing you made me do, that roadmap thing you made me do from here to there, hated it. Really, really hard, but I'm so glad you made me do it, because now I feel like I can do this. And so that was like the first light bulb that said, maybe there is a better way do stuff like this, right? The regular playbook was cut costs, fire people,
Yeah, same
whatever it is, sort of
nonsense. Yeah.
turn in on yourself. And I said,
Mm.
I didn't want to do that, right? I wanted to, we apologized for what we did. It was a horrible thing, and we gave everyone a free month of stuff, and because that's the right thing to do, and it made a difference. And my people it was a happy group. I did a whole bunch of other stuff that I can go into if you want, but it's in the book. Exactly what I did, and I put a whole bunch of structure so that I wasn't necessary. And I knew that this was working because about 10 months into this process, my day was over by 11 in the morning. I had all my meetings done, and I could just do what I want. I could think, I could walk around the building, I could do whatever I wanted. And I'm like, okay, because all the decisions that needed to be made were pushed out, right? And I gave them the guardrails, and they had confidence, and they were competent people. And so I'm like, this is a better way to do stuff. And that's sort of when it started. I didn't really get into it until about 10 years ago. And that's when I really said, that's when my little tagline, it's a shame that people, great people, started.
So what you're saying is you could have been the best-selling author before Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek then?
Maybe. I don't know.
No, but I like that. That's a great story. One question that came to my mind was your colleague had talked about this roadmap. Did you get what was this roadmap? Describe it to me. And what did you get everyone within the team to do it? What was that all about?
It was my, I'll call it a vision. I think that's overstating what I did. I basically said, look, here are the 3 or 4, I think it was 4 or 5 key objectives that I want us to reach in the different areas of the business, right? The technical side of the business, the marketing side, the sales side, et cetera. I said, and here's what that should look like, in my opinion, like when we're successful, right? So one of them was, and I didn't do this all on my own, I worked with the team. And one of them was, look, in order for us to be a viable option as a SaaS provider, our uptime needed to be 5 nines, right? 99.999%, which is like 8 hours of downtime. I mean, it's like nearly in a year. So we did stuff like that. And then I said, okay, now these are yours. And now I need you to take that, break it down into smaller pieces. So then how we get to the 5 nines, head of network infrastructure, right? What needs to happen? What are the steps that need to happen? And part of it was we needed to basically, we actually had an overnight where we had scheduled downtime. We moved the entire business, if you will, of servers to another area of the place we're in. So this is before AWS, right? You had to rent space, and you had to run your own servers and all that kind of stuff. So like 30 of us got together, worked all through the night till like 3 a.m. Wow. And they unscrewed, we carried stuff over, and because the way it was set up was incorrect, and the only way to do it, we needed to basically rebuild the whole thing. And they did it overnight. They did it in like 12 hours. It was amazing. So things like that had to happen, right? Very operational, specific things had to happen in order to do that. And so that's what each of them did. And then, I just sort of, I challenged them and questioned them, et cetera. But, they were competent, as I said, and solid people. And we sort of worked together, and they would tell us every week what's going on, what's not working. And then we'd say, what about this? Can we try that? How can we help? And that sort of slow march really made a difference.
So what you're saying is that basically you built the strategy and said, hey, these are the parameters that I think that we need to work towards, and then basically reversed engineered it, right?
Yeah. And I didn't say something like 5 nines. I went to Alex and said, tell me, what is a great infrastructure? What is it? What is a world-class infrastructure? And how do you know? And he said 5 nines. And I said, okay, how do we do that? And he said, well, it's going to cost money. It's going to do this. I'm like, okay, well, let's do it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And so I guess then once you've then implemented that, then like you said, the results off the back of that is then you can finish work by 11 o'clock because you've effectively streamlined things, outsourced things, and created a structure where everyone is singing off the same hymn note, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And what's really cool, I did this recently because I didn't really appreciate it till now, is that by the time we sort of figured this all out, we didn't add a lot of headcount. So we almost basically doubled the size of the business. And I didn't add a lot of headcount because I didn't need to.
Got it.
And we had I think we had 55% gross margin. Now, just so you know, that is equal to about 90% gross margin now. Because we had all this cost that most people don't have now. So that was the CEO of the overall business. He didn't really like me that much because I was a salesman. But he understood that I was not just a sales guy, right? I was a systems guy, and I thought about
Yeah.
numbers, and I measured stuff, and he liked that about me. He was very happy with the business, right? We were still we were a small bit. We were like 15 million out of 100, but we were probably a very large percentage of the profit of the business.
Very interesting. Love that story. I want to backtrack, if I may, because you said something that hit a note with me, which was around some of our listeners, which are leaders, founders, that are, and you mentioned the word, it goes back to their childhood.
Mm.
I want to kind of ask you a question around that. When you say it goes back to their childhood, what do you mean by that? Are you saying that their experiences and their childhood behavior causes trauma or whatever it might be? Like, what do you mean by that? Give us some
Yeah,
context.
sure. Well, it's not trauma at all. It's reward. Generally the people that reach the people listening to your show are
Yep.
successful people. They were
Yep.
probably good at school. And when you're good at school, you have the answer.
Yes.
And you're rewarded for having the answer. But when you get to a certain point, your job isn't to have the answer, it's to have the question. Right? It's to say, how do we do this? It's not to come in and say, I tell leaders all the time, if you come into a room and say, hey, I have a really great idea last night to fix the business, and then you lay it out there and then you say, what do you think? Guess what they say? Adam, you're a genius. I mean, how did you come up with that, right? But that's not your job. Your job is to say, hey, we have this problem in the business. I have some ideas, but let's make sure we shape, is this really the problem we have? You want to ask much better questions. And now you're training them to think for themselves. You're using their brains, which you hired them for anyway. Why would you do what, Jim Collins says, the genius with 1,000 helpers? That doesn't really work. And eventually that doesn't scale either. That's what I mean by it's in your childhood. It's not some sort of traumatic thing that happened to you. It's actually a thing that rewards you. It's like, I'm great because I know stuff and I have the answer. And then as you move to business and work, you solve the problem. You're the close the deal, whatever it is, right? And that is a reward system that is ingrained in you for decades. And then you get to be a leader of teams or companies, and it is the thing that is going to slowly destroy what you've built.
And that's interesting. I never thought it from that perspective. So what you're basically saying is that a lot of our listeners that, as you mentioned around the kind of heroes trap, where they're the firefighter, they're the operator mindset, what you're saying, in order to disrupt or change that pattern interrupt, if you want to call it that, or mindset shift that needs to happen, what you're saying is they need to then retrain themselves and become more curious driven. What does that look like? How did you make it?
So this is where I get into the book, right? So to me, it's an identity repertoire that you have to understand.
Yes.
And the way I look at it is there are 3 stages. There's control, where you're that hero. Right? And by the way, if you're a founder of a company, you need to be a hero, right? You need to understand a lot of stuff and you need to do a lot of things, and that's perfectly fine. But eventually, as you scale, as I say to my clients, your job as you scale the business is to fire yourself from the day to day as much as possible and as quickly as possible. And I think you've heard you say something similar in some of your stuff as well, right? So how do you do that? You do, this is sort of where we get to this leadership development thing, right? You become a coach.
Yes.
And I call it a builder, right? So you're a controller, you move to builder. And the builder is, I teach you how I do stuff.
Yep.
Right. So you have, I teach you how I solve, and then I build systems that don't need me to solve anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the architect is the last stage of this. So you go from controller to builder architect, but there will be times where you're sort of in architect mode doing things and something happens. Maybe you have some unique knowledge or some crazy thing happens and you have to be a controller again. You have to go back in and you have to, run the meeting and get the stuff done and make the decision. Perfectly fine. But if you just stay there, then that's when your business slows down because, the line gets really long outside your office. And you've now created learned helplessness. They're like, well, let's wait. Let's see what Adam says. What you want is, you don't want to say, let me run this by Adam before we do it. It's like, oh, we've said we want to do this. So this is a logical thing. It fits within these guidelines. It works in the parameters. It's moving us towards our vision. I'll let Adam know what we're doing. Right. And most of the time you're going to be like, great, keep going. I think the best example is Turn the Ship Around from David Marquet. Or I don't know how you say his name.
Yeah.
I've heard Marquette, but whatever. and that's what he did, right? He had to become an architect because he didn't know how to run the sub,
Yes.
right? He said 2/3 ahead, and the guy at the helm said, "We don't have 2/3, Captain. What do I do?" Right? And he's like, "Oh, okay. Well, then I better not start giving you orders because that's probably going to get us in a lot of trouble." And he said you created this I intend thing, right? I intend to go to 3/4. I intend to put the torpedo in silo, whatever.
Mhm.
And it became a completely different model. And by the way, that's now how the Navy works. And because his submarine went from the worst to the first in 2 years and got the highest scores from any sub, any time of the U.S. Navy, the highest rating scores when they were inspected. There's some really good examples of why this works, but also why it happens.
So they're like leadership archetypes. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And so if I go back to exiting a business, I've got the controller who is in stage 1. I've got the builder in stage 2, and I've got the archetype in stage 3.
Architect,
So,
yeah.
yeah, the architect, sorry. So I guess my question would be is then how, like, if it's one of our listeners that's thinking, okay, well, I'm not really sure, what is the kind of ideal percentage of where I need to be at, right? So, for example, do I need to be more builder, say 50%? Do I need to be more archetype? Is there kind of like a ground work in terms of like what I need to work towards in terms of trying to get the business moving forwards? Like, what are you trying to guide people towards?
Yeah. So I'll give an answer. I've not done research. I can't tell you that this is the way to do it, and
Sure.
it really depends.
Yeah.
But sort of working through the problem, it's sort of a 30-30-40 model.
Okay.
30 controller, 30 builder, 30 architect. You always want to be moving towards architect, right? That's really the point, right? If you go in and solve the problem and then you walk away, then you're letting your future self down, because then
Yes.
what happens is they're going to come back to you with a nuance of the same problem, and you're going to have to do it again. And then they're going to come back with a different nuance, and you become, as I think as Dave Marquis, you can't have dinner, right? You can't go home, because you've now created a situation where they're not thinking for themselves. But there will be always times in a business where you got to jump in, right? But as soon as you jump in, you should say, okay, that was a problem. I solved the problem, and stop and say, what caused that problem to happen?
Yes.
Let me solve that one. And then let me teach my team how I do it. That's the builder, right? Teach them how you do this, because they're like, wow, how did you do that, Adam? That was amazing. And you say, well, here's how I think. And that's fine, but you don't want a bunch of mini yous around, right? You eventually want them to think of themselves. They have a different way of doing things. You have a certain brain that works a certain way. It may be good at certain things and not at other things. And you want to leverage all the wonderful assets you have available in terms of brain power and neurons. And when you give that heuristic almost, then they're like, okay, I know how he does it, but in this situation, I think within the guidelines, I would do it this way instead, because I have more information, I'm looking at it differently, etc. That's when you know you've done something, because they're now improving on what you did and doing it in a way that you never would have thought of. And it's better than you would have thought of. That's an architect.
I was going to say, I had a really interesting conversation actually just a few days ago with a founder. Now she was a controller, 100%. She was a controller. But one thing that became apparent to me when I had the conversation was that she wasn't self-aware because she didn't have the brain capacity or the brain space to realize that she was the controller, right? There are struggles where we tend to move into these, I'm going to call them archetypes, and we stay there, or we work in a particular way because that is the way that we believe it works for us. But then we come like, there's me and you, we'll go into a business and we're like, but why are you doing that? That isn't moving you forwards, right? What are those struggles like? I mean, I'm sure that you've seen these kind of self-sabotaging patterns over and over and over again. I guess my big question would be is there a particular exercise that you teach people to become more self-aware of what archetype they are and what do they need to do according to their objective?
Most founders exit too late, not too early. They hit their number, then waste another 2 years second guessing it. Here's what keeps you stuck. You know what your business is worth, but you don't know what you're worth once you're out. Will the life you're picturing cost you 3, 5, or 8 million pounds? You probably have no idea. Now, our sponsors, Zentum, are financial planners who have built a tool for exactly this. It's called the Cash Out with Confidence Assessment Tool, and it shows you the real numbers, what your exit actually funds, and whether there's a gap to actually close. It takes less than 5 minutes, and you'll know if you can exit now or how much longer you need before you actually can. Go to cash-out-with-confidence.scoreup.com or check out the link in the show description notes below. Enjoy.
Yeah. I was going to go somewhere else, but since you asked that last question. So my favorite exercise for people to do this is I want you to run a meeting and people can only ask questions. And they can't ask questions that already have the answer in them. They have to be actual clarifying or discovery questions.
Got it.
And that it starts to train you to think, not to have the answer, because, our brain works against us in these situations because our brain wants the answer. Our brain does not like uncertainty. It doesn't like solve things that aren't solved. It wants them solved. And outside of our conscious awareness, it's actually moving us towards solving it. But we think it's us. We think it's us doing it, but it's actually not. It is our brain is not ours.
Yeah.
We are borrowing it from our ancestors, right? And their job was to stay alive. And it's still thinks it's on the savannah with 150 people in the tribe and it's just surviving. It doesn't know the difference between a social and a physical threat, really. It acts the same exact way that if you're attacked by a saber-toothed tiger or whatever, or a man with a gun and speaking in front of an audience, it thinks it's going to die, which is why you start sweating and your heart starts beating and all that kind of stuff happens. Your brain is like, get out of there, right? You're going to die because it doesn't know anything. It's in the dark, in a dark dungeon. So that's like, I think the tragedy of it.
Yes.
And that is the insidious nature of what's going on, is because we only know this way and it's always worked for us. And we're like, what the hell? Why isn't it working anymore? What I've seen is even worse than your situation is someone who is self-aware and can't help him or herself. I have witnessed this. I had a leader who read all the books, knew all the words, all that stuff. And then when pressure hit, financial or otherwise, he went into controller mode and he just took over.
That was fascinating.
Whatever, right? Unfortunately, I think he went through 13 senior leadership team members during my 5-year tenure. There are only 8 or 9 on the team, and he went through 13. Only 3 of them were left from the original group that I worked with.
Wow.
And, he's an awesome guy. And he has a great business. And, and I just, I failed him. I couldn't help him stop that. Right.
Yeah.
I tried. So, it happens. And I'm not wagging my finger at people. I'm not saying, you should feel bad about yourself. I mean, it happens. Right. But once you should at least try. And that's my book I'm trying to do is say, here are some things that you can do that might help you to move towards something that's not just your default, right? When pressure hits, that's not a different you, that's the floor, right? And actually might say who you truly are when, as we say, if you want to know someone really well, get into a difficult situation with them, they'll show you who they really are.
Yeah.
When things are going great, that's not really who they are. It's when things are tough that they default really, sort of their, what they're most comfortable being.
Yeah.
And some people will jump right in. Some people will acquiesce and retreat. It depends on who you are, right?
Yeah.
And that's all I'm saying is just notice that. And then you have other options. You have 3 other identities. You have 2 other identities.
Yeah.
Which one is the best one here? It might be the builder. It might be the controller. But know that you don't have to just go back and be that person because it feels the most comfortable to you.
Yeah. It's really interesting. You mentioned about the fact that what I call the primal brain, which is like the controller, right? So it's the primal brain survival, fight or flight response type of analogy.
Yep.
And then you've obviously got the builder, which uses a different part of the brain. And I can't remember the neuroscience things, but I remember primal brain. So I remember that one, but I'm sure it will come to me in a second.
Yes. brainstem, which is
Yep.
what you're talking about. And you got
Yep.
the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain.
Yes.
And then you got the prefrontal cortex, which is the discerning part of the brain, where where it controls the other parts of your brain.
Yep.
Some of the time.
Exactly. I want to switch up, because I know that there is you write about what we call the dopamine confession. And now, when I heard that, I was like, "Whoa!" I love that, because obviously it's happy hormones and stuff. But when when you get like a leader that realizes that they like being the hero, and the only one that can fix things, right? That's messed up, and they've done. And if someone is listening right now and their stomach has just dropped, what do they do when we talk about dopamine and stuff? It feels good to them, but really, it's kind of not, type of thing.
Yeah. So you're describing basically addiction.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is. If it's alcohol or drugs or whatever, it's an addiction, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, what's also, and I'll use the word again, insidious, is everyone else wants you to be that too.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're the hero, right? You save things, and we like that,
Yep.
I had a group of folks so this company that I was telling you about earlier, when I first came in, I took over sales and some stuff. And then one of the guys who was the founder said, "Hey, can you take over marketing?" He was an engineer and whatever. And he was a controller, right? He had the scrum in the morning and the afternoon. The 4 or 5 of them got in a circle for whatever is 5-10 minutes. He said, "You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this." And at the end of the day, he said, "How'd it go?" Whatever. And then he did that every day. And they just did what he said. And I took over and I said, one, I don't really know how to run marketing. I don't know how to do social media. I said, but I do want to know what it means to delight customers.
Yes.
And I do know, and so I said, I believe that you guys know what you're doing. And until such time that you prove that you don't, I'm going to assume that you do. I said, so you tell me what we need to do to get where I just said we should be getting. And I'll tell you, Adam, they hated me. They were not happy. Because they had been trained to not think. And I'm like, no, you're thinking. And no, now 6 months go by, 9 months go by, I'm sort of dealing with this. And I'll tell you, for the next 5 or 10 years, I was their reference. They loved me because they didn't believe me at first. But I'm like, you know what you're doing. You're good at this. Do it. Right. And so we helped each other. And so that helps you to get away from this feeling of, this dopamine thing. But it's an addiction. Addiction is hard. You have to be aware of it and then create a situation where it doesn't happen. What you have to do, and this is what the book is about really, is you have to create a structure so the things that you want to happen just happen. It's not about, this is where part of my issue is with leadership development. Leadership development focuses mostly on behavior.
Yes.
Which is actually just making this hero thing. It's in better clothes. Right. And you have to go beyond behavior to get to where people are feeling like members versus followers. So you have to put this structure in place, right? You have to say, here's how we do that. And this is how we build, simple thing. This is how we run meetings here. Right. Now you may put your own style and whatever, but here's how meetings go. You write an outcome first.
Yep.
Right. And you make sure, and then you sort of run it by a bunch of people and say, here's what I think a really good outcome of this meeting would be. You get it, nail the outcome. Then you say, great, who should be in this meeting to give me the best chance of reaching that outcome every time we meet? And only those people will be in the meeting, not anyone else, unless we decide we want to do something else. Great. Now write the agenda. Then have the meeting. And when you reach the outcome, stop the meeting. If you haven't reached the outcome, then decide, should we continue the meeting or should we reconvene at a better time? And then when you're done, tell everyone who needs to know what happened. And then measure, how did that go? That's how we do meetings here, right? I remember I went in Intel, I was in the 90s or something, I went to Intel, and they had it on the wall. Every meeting room had it on the wall. This is how Intel runs meetings. And if, by the way, if you didn't do this meeting this way, anyone has the permission to leave.
Wow.
Say, I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a tiny thing, but until you put the structure in place, so the behavior just happens naturally. But if you want to learn the guitar, then put it next to you on the couch. Don't
That's a
have
good
it in the
start, right?
closet, right? Yeah. If you want to not eat bad food, cakes, and don't have them in the house. Oh, don't think I'm going to have willpower. You don't have willpower. It lasts about 20 minutes and then it goes away, right? Just make it so it doesn't happen, right? My dad was an alcoholic. He said, no alcohol in the house. I'm not going to bars. I'm not hanging around people that I used to drink with, because guess what? That behavior just happens. You have to create the structure so the behavior that you want just naturally comes out of it. Not say, you better behave this way. You need to delegate more. You need to, whatever. That doesn't necessarily get you what you want over the long term. It might work in the short term, but it hardly works in the long term, especially when, again, pressure, uncertainty, etc. happens.
So what you're saying is, in order to break the addiction is, and you've given a good example of run a meeting, have a protocol for running a particular meeting, for example, and that makes you aware of how to get away from the whole kind of dopamine addiction. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It's a very tiny example of that, right? But yes.
Yeah.
But most people hate meetings. Most people think meetings is a waste of time. Most people know that one or two people dominate the meetings. One people like, why even meeting? And then they have the meeting after the meeting to talk about the meeting. And then you're like, that's not what you want. That's not the behavior you want. So create the behavior you want by creating a structure that forces that behavior to happen every time. Everyone knows how to run a meeting, whether you're talking about moving the trash can to another part of the building, or you're trying to do a brand new process on how to deliver goods.
Yep.
It's the same meeting. We have the same structure for every single thing. Same thing with decisions or whatever, right? He would make decisions this way. We do change this way.
Marshall Goldsmith, a good friend of ours, isn't he? And for you guys that haven't listened to Marshall, we've actually had him on the podcast, and we've collaborated on a couple of occasions on various summits and stuff. But he wrote the foreword to your new and up and coming book, I believe. Is that correct?
He did, yeah.
He did. And then you've got endorsements by Amy Edmondson and Alan McNally. What in terms of like their, should we say, their vertical in terms of leadership, in terms of what they do, how does what they do kind of connect with what you're doing? Like in terms of what you're teaching, where's the kind of commonality and stuff? Is there a kind of an interlinking thread that they see?
Yeah, sure.
I'd love to know more about that.
I've asked 5 people to be on the back of my book, and I did it on purpose. And it's Alan, Amy, and then Jonah Berger. I don't know if you know Jonah Berger from Wharton.
Nope.
He is awesome. He writes great books. He's up there with the Heath brothers to me on the book.
Wow.
He's tremendous. And then there's Vern Harnish, who is scaling up.
Yep.
And then Ari Weinsweig from Zinger. I love Ari because he's an anarchist, right? He's up there with me. He's an iconoclast, right?
Love it.
So Amy's a diagnostician.
Yes.
And a great one.
She is a very good one.
And she's super generous, and she's such a wonderful person.
Yep.
Jonah, I don't know very well, but we've connected over a few things, and we would have whatever. And I said, "Would you mind?" And he's like, "Here." And
Sure.
he wrote. So he's he transcends the diagnostician applier kind of model, like the Heath brothers do. They sort of diagnose. They don't go quite as deeply as my book does, but because I'm an operator, I'm writing books for operators.
Yes.
Right. And I'm like, what's next? I'm trying to answer what's next. Great. I understand, Bill. You're right. I have this thing. Now what do I do? Right.
Yeah.
I can't will it into existence. And I give them very specific frameworks and steps and things to do that. And then Alan is, to me, the finest CEO we've ever had. I don't know anyone who has done what he did twice in a lifetime. I don't know anyone who's done what he's done once. Right. I mean, he saved Boeing in the middle of 9/11.
That's insane.
Ford in the middle of 2008. He is the nicest human being you will ever meet. You don't have to be a dick to run.
There's plenty out there, trust me.
Yeah, I know. And that's also what we celebrate. It's like, he's acerbic. He's, but that's Steve being Steve, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever. That's a way. It is a way to do it. And by the way, it works, right? It certainly works for Apple,
Yeah.
But it isn't the only way. And I don't know if it's the best way. But it doesn't. I'm not saying there's a way, right? I'm not saying you have to be like Alan Mulally. I think you should be the best version of yourself, because people will forgive you your foibles
Yeah.
If you give them something compelling, if you give them gravity, moving towards a thing, they will forgive you some of your issues. We're seeing that all over the place in the political spectrum, everywhere, right?
Oh God.
So leadership, that's why I say leadership isn't a thing.
No.
We can't say you need to be these things and people decide whether you're a leader or not. You can't say I'm the leader. You can say I'm in charge. I have authority. You must do what I say.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're following you.
Yeah.
They're.
Oh, I agree. Very good.
Anyway.
So, what I was going to say, now you might have heard of this before, by the way. I'm not sure if we did it in Morag's show, but I'm kind of going to throw you in the deep end here. So one of the things I'd love to do on the show is I love our guests, you, to coach me. Now, interestingly enough, I know that a lot of our listeners love this part because not only is it it gives them some insight, but it helps them, it gives them some activity, it gives them some meat on the bone that helps them to kind of like feel them a bit more relatable and gives them some activities to go away from the podcast. Now, I'm just thinking, I just kind of like want to put some context here. Now, I want to switch it up. You are the coach now.
Mm-hmm.
I am the client. I have a problem. You work with operators. You said that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to say this now. So I was an operator for many, many years. I'm going to imagine putting myself in that operator mode because I was there for many, many years. In fact, I reckon it took me probably in excess of 15 years to get to my first 6 figures.
Okay.
That's a long time. Long time, right? For some of our listeners that are hoping that as each year goes by, they're like, this is my year. This is my year. Things are going to be different. Things are going to be, and they just use tenacity. They just keep going and going and going. What is it that I need to do as an operator to shift not just my identity and my mindset? What do I need to do differently?
Have you written a vision for your business?
I have.
Is it a sentence or many, many pages?
I wouldn't say it's many, many pages. It's more I'd say it's probably more a couple of sentences.
So it needs to be a lot more than that. So a vision should be a very vivid picture of what it looks like when you're done.
Okay. Are you talking about like exit strategy?
Could be everything. So what I usually have people do is I have them write a vision as a narrative of a day in the life, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever.
Oh, okay.
And then you're describing how the business is running through that. And you're talking about identity and outcomes and all the things that you're doing operationally, et cetera. So and you're not writing this for yourself. You're writing this for someone who doesn't work for you yet. And when you want to hire them, you're like, I really want to hire Bill. You hand them this, and this tells them what they're getting into. And they're like, I'm in, or I'm not. It has to be vivid. It has to be like a painting, but in words. So it got to be at least 3, 5, sometimes some of them are 7, 8, 9 pages that my leaders write.
Wow.
And it is deep. Then you give that to everyone. You give them to all your stakeholders. This is the ultimate, right? You give that to all your stakeholders, not just your employees, your partners, your suppliers, whatever, and say, this is what we're about. So Kip Tyndall did this at the Container Store. He wrote a vision and he gave it to everyone, all of his stakeholders. And that changed the relationship. Like, now I know what you're doing. Let's have a different relationship than we have because I think I can help you more than I'm helping you now, or maybe you can help me or whatever. It completely changed the things. It takes courage to do that, right? Because you're basically giving away what is your baby. And so some people are super uncomfortable with that. Some people think someone's going to steal it and whatever. You know what? They could, but Song and Continental Light and Ted stole Southwest stuff and they don't exist anymore. And
that's true.
Kelleher just said, here, this is what we do.
Right.
But they didn't do it, or they couldn't do it the way he does it. Right. So most people, even if they steal it, won't never be able to do it your way. And that's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to do something, build your way, carve out your part of the world and really nail it. Because, most leaders don't understand this, is that the Pareto principle is a genius principle, right? The 80-20 rule. If you go and look at your profit of your business, 80% of your profit, give or take, will be from 20% of your clients.
Yep.
What does that mean? That means one more is 16 times more valuable than all the others.
True.
So stop just trying to bring clients on. Bring on the right clients, because the profit is what drives your business, because that drives your cash, which drives your growth, right? You have to fund your growth through something. You can certainly get money from outside, but I'd rather have you fund it yourself. That's the fuel that does the business. But we don't do that. We think revenue's cool and et cetera, but it's not. In the end, at the beginning, it's fine, but in the end, you want profit because you want cash.
Yes.
And if you don't set that, right, and that is saying people want two things from their leaders when asked. They want lots of stuff, but the two things that I've read always come to the top. They want to know first, Adam, whatever you tell me is true, because trust arrives on foot and leaves in a Ferrari.
Love that.
Now, you may not be able to tell them everything all the time, but whatever you do tell them has to be true, because as soon as they find out that it's not, you won't lose trust, but it'll like a battery. It'll go down a little.
Yeah.
And if you keep doing that, the battery and to charge the battery takes a lot longer to get that back. So that's the first thing they want. The second thing they want is, where are we going?
Yep.
And that's what the vision says. This is where we're going. It's not a roadmap, right? It just says, we're here in Maine and we want to go to California, and this is what California looks like. There are beaches, there are beautiful women, there's sun, and there's this, and there's roller skating and whatever, right? Now, we could go down, we could go across 90 across the top, we could go down the bottom, whatever. We might get something in the way. The map isn't driven, but the destination has been described, right? What most people do if they get on a bus, they're describing the past. And they're trying to get to the future by looking in the rearview mirror. A vision is saying, look, this is what it looks like through the front window when we get there.
Got it.
Do you want to do this? Because if you don't, you shouldn't work here. You're going to be miserable.
But then I guess my thought process is then, how does if you were, say you had, I don't know, so you had not just me, but say you had me and a load of other clients, and you all said, hey guys, I want you to write your vision, right? And this is my expectations. What would you be looking for in a good vision? What is a crap vision? What does that look like? What is the context? What's the distinctions between one and the other?
Yeah, so I'll give them like the structure. And actually, I don't give it. I think Cameron Herold did a great job in Vivid Vision to sort of lay the structure out. And I say, look, use this as your framework, right? You might want to change it up a little bit, but he gives 7 examples. I mean, it's wonderful, right? Because writing a vision, some of my leaders are like, I don't want to write a vision. That sounds really hard. I don't know how to do that. And I'm like, it is. But, what also is wonderful these days is you can say, just throw everything into ChatGPT and say, can you start my vision for me? Then you can edit it as opposed to creating it. Creation is a daunting task. And then I will certainly chime in, right? They'll send it to me and I'll say, this is like a bunch of bullets. This isn't very inspiring or motivating, right? Again, write it a certain way, tell stories. I did that recently with a hospital that I'm working with now. And I said, why don't you bring someone who's just coming into the hospital, walk them through the hospital, and then walk like one of your partners or whatever through the hospital as well. And describe what they see and go in the operating room. And that would be really interesting. And she did it. And so she's going to read it to her team next week. I want to see how it goes. So then that's the next step, which is give it to your team. Don't give it out to everyone, just to your team, your senior leadership team, and not to change it. Although you may decide that some of the suggestions are good ones and you agree with them, but to make sure it's clear. Is there jargon in here that doesn't work or stuff you don't understand? You've written stuff. You'll write it and you'll give it to someone and they'll be like, I don't really know what the second paragraph says, Adam.
Yeah.
And you're like, what do you mean you don't know? It's perfectly clear to me, because you're not writing it for yourself. You're writing it for the audience. And then that's when you're onto something, but you really know when you give it away.
I just had a thought process that's gone through my mind, and I don't know if this might be the same for some of our listeners, but one of the things that come to my mind was, because I think what you described is a great example, but I think my biggest fear is, how do I create a vision without it feeling like it's like a personal memoir or a diary? And then if I share it with someone that doesn't work for us, but I'd love for them to come on board, why would they even give a shit? Right. So that would be, again, a fear or a pain, a struggle that I would have in my mind. How would you, what would you do to, what would you say to me to try to overcome that thought belief system?
Taylor Swift. The answer is Taylor Swift.
Love it. Taylor
Right? Every
Swift.
single song she writes is about herself.
That's true, actually. That's
But-
very true. Not that I'm
but-
a big fan of her, but hey ho, I get it though.
But they love her.
Yep.
And they're like, you're singing about me, right? And that's what you want. It's not, it's not a memoir, but it's definitely it's the reason you joined or you started the business, right? You saw there was dissatisfaction. There was something that you said isn't right in the world, and I want to make a difference. I want to change that. It has to be personal.
Yep. Love that.
Now, you of course have to then say, and here's my take on how I'm affecting other lives, right? Here are the key stakeholders. Here's how we delight customers. Here's how we have thriving people in the organization. Here's how we treat our partners that work with us, et cetera. Of course, you have to then extend it out to others, but it's really coming from you.
Yes.
Yeah,
I guess in a way, it's kind of a little bit like describing your brand story in a way, or elements of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm reading this book called Storyworthy. Have you read this by Matthew Dix? I think his name is. And
No.
he's won the Grand Slam, Moth Grand Slam a bunch of times, and he basically says, look, people they want to know stories, because basically the vision is just a story.
Yeah.
Right. But they want it to be personal. If you just sort of tell a story about someone else, then that's fine, and you're a good storyteller. But you're not going to get the same reaction from people when you let them into your life and you show how you're struggling or what you're struggling with, and something you overcame or whatever. That's when people are like, that's when they get into it. And that's what the vision should be, right? Is hey, we started here and we want to end up here. And here's the, I think one of the things he says is, we generally want the person to succeed, but we definitely want them to suffer along the way. We want them to overcome. And that's what the vision says. This is after we've overcome all these things, this is what that looks like. If you do it, so my answer is, Adam, it is personal.
Yes.
I don't think it can be anything but personal. Don't just make it about you. Don't make it egocentric.
No, but that's, again, I was going to bring that up. It's kind of like, you don't want it to come across as me type of thing, because otherwise you're just going to become a douchebag. No one is working for a douchebag.
Yeah, well, you probably already were, if that's what you wrote.
That's very true. That's very true, actually. I love that. All right, that's good. So I was going to say, past experience. And again, this is probably for some of our listeners, and I know that there are some listeners here that are what we call a foreign firefighting mode, because they don't have the capacity because they're doing everything. They're the operator, as you rightly pointed out. What would be, some of the top tips that you'd advise me, that if I don't dedicate this time to flesh out that vision, what are the consequences, and what are the, what are cons?
Yeah, well, the consequence is eventually your business will just stall.
Yes.
Right. I mean,
Agreed.
and by the way, some people are fine with that. Some people have a lifestyle business and they're cool with it, right? They make enough money. Okay. And again, nothing wrong with that at all. But if you want to scale, if you want to grow your business, then you have to fire yourself from the day to day as much as possible.
Yep.
How do you fire yourself from the day to day? I think Marcus Buckingham has a great exercise, which is the love-loathe exercise, right? And I recommend my leaders do this all the time. For those of you who don't know, you have a piece of paper, you have two columns, love and loathe. Love is, what do I love doing? What that means is, what gives me energy?
Yep.
When time stands still, I'm doing this thing, right?
Yep.
Write those things down. Take it for a week or a month or whatever, and just start writing those things. Don't do anything about it. Then do loathe, which is the opposite, right? It drains me. I put things off. 5 minutes feels like an hour. Those are the things you want to start getting off your list.
Yes.
Because most of the time, it isn't time, it's energy.
Yes.
That you want to be thinking about. If you're doing things that fill you up, then you actually have energy. But if you do things that don't, then you're drained, right? And that's why you're exhausted as a leader, because you're doing a lot of things so that you just sort of feel like you got to do. It's responsible, or I can do it better than anyone else, or whatever. And it might be right, but is that the right decision? If someone can do it 80 to 90% of good as you, is that okay?
Yeah.
So you have to sort of take that perfectionism thing out of you.
Yes.
And then just start giving away those low things. And I give 4 options. I think what's his name? Vader is his name. Vader? Can't remember the guy's name.
It's not Darth Vader, is it?
No, not Darth Vader. Not Vader. Is automate it? Is there something you can automate? So what I did is I learned, I don't know, 10 years ago that when you try to set up a meeting with someone, the average time of back and forth is 8.
Yes.
To set up a meeting. And then I heard this thing, Calendly or Time Trade. I'm like, oh, I'm doing that. So I just give my calendar away, right? Now, so that just saves me time, right? So automate something. Right?
Sure.
That's a simple automation, but
yeah,
whatever. Then you could delegate it, right? There's someone else in your organization who may actually want to do it and will be better at it than you.
Yep.
So, teach them what you want, give them the outcome, and then say, great, go do it. And they'll probably do it better than you, faster than you, whatever. The next thing is to eliminate it.
Mhm.
Like if you're doing reports or whatever, and I say, if you're doing the report you hate and you're like, I don't know if anyone reads it, don't do it. And just see if someone notices, right? Which gets to the next thing, which is procrastinate, right? Just, stop doing something and see if anyone notices. If nobody notices, then you could probably eliminate it.
Yep.
If they do, then you're like, okay, now you have to make a decision.
Yeah.
Should we keep doing it? Do I need to keep doing it? Can I hire a third party to do it? Whatever.
Love that.
To me, those are very simple things you can do.
It's really interesting. I have this task, right? I actually assign a particular task. It's called the stop doing list. So this is actually, so it's kind of very similar. But what I love about the love and loathe thing is kind of like, this is the stuff that I want to be doing. This is the stuff that I hate doing. But I think what I love about what you said was the 3 different ones, which is automate, delegate, and eliminate, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I love that. Very good.
Yeah. And by the way, just so people are clear, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you do that does not make either list.
Right.
Just ignore them for now, right? Just do the extremes first.
Yep.
Then once you figure that out, which might take you years, by the way, then you can start going into the middle a little. But
yeah. Love that. Park it to one side, ladies and gents.
Exactly.
Well, listen, I know that we're coming toward the end, but tell us a little bit more about the new book that's coming out. I know it's not out for a while, but give us a flavor about what is it that the reader could be looking forward to.
Yeah. So can I read the thing I told you about?
Yeah, go for it.
Yes. So as I was saying to Adam, to those who are listening, before we came on, I got my first third-party review through my publisher just an hour or so before I came on with Adam. And the person that did it is a coach, is a leadership development coach. And she wrote, "This book was a delight to read and work with, and it's the only book in my review experience that I'm already planning to purchase for all my leadership development clients. So that's something too."
Now you're just teasing us, by the way. You're just teasing us.
Yeah. So what is the book about? So what I try to do is, so I've read 1,000 business books probably. And I know which ones I like and which ones I don't. So I wrote a book that I would read, that I would want to read as an operator. So I basically combined the accessibility of multipliers from Liz Wiseman.
Yes.
Multiplier diminisher. The rigor of like a Heath Brothers or a Dr. Jonah Berger or someone like that, Jonathan Haidt. And then the accessibility, the readability of like a Lencioni.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a parable. I've actually written a parable, but it has the science that supports what's going on with the person, and then it has the controller, builder, architect woven throughout the thing. And just to tease a little more, there are 6 other books coming out after it, which then goes into more depth of. So now here's the kind of leader you need to be. Now here's how you create the operating system that. Like an Alan Mulally or a Reed Hastings or an Andy Jassy or Bezos at Amazon. This is what they do.
Yes.
So I'm trying to write a book that I would like and I would have read. And I know that some people don't like to read books. So if you read the first, all the 7 books, if you read the first part of the book, I immediately give you 3 things to do. Like, if you don't want to read anymore, don't. Do these 3 things and you'll be 50 to 80% of the way there. because some people just want to jump in. But I also have a toolkit at the end of every book that if you want to go and do it yourself, here are 7, 10, 12 different exercises you can use. So I think I've written a book that no one's ever written before. As far as I can tell, no one's ever written a book quite like this. I hope it matters, but I'm pretty excited about it. And obviously that first review is nice. We'll see what the other reviewers say. They may not be as kind.
Very good. And for you guys that are listening in and are intrigued by Bill's book, by the way, it comes out in October 2026, depending on when you're listening to this episode, of course. And you can also check out Bill's previous book that I mentioned as well at the very beginning as well. Well, first of all, this has been a great conversation. We've had lots of fun. I think this has been, I can certainly relate to a lot of the conversations that we've had today. And I feel like certainly a lot of our listeners that you've been making notes, because again, I feel like what Bill has given you is a real masterclass into, if you are that operator, how do we kind of transition into the next phase of the business? Because I'm not being funny, and it's the same for Bill. Between us, we've probably seen hundreds, if not thousands, of business that are just stuck in a cycle, like a bit like a wash machine that just doesn't stop. And if you get stuck in that cycle, it's a bit like Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole. It's very difficult to get out of unless you have the right frameworks, the right advice, the right insights, but more importantly, the right kind of story and context that's going to help you transition from where you are to where you want to go. So, Bill, thank you so much. This has been a great show, right?
I loved it. Yeah. Thank you.
It's been a great show. For you guys that also, please do me a favor, go and connect with Bill over on social media, whether it be on LinkedIn, have a check out his website, go onto Amazon, check out his book or whatever it might be. And hopefully you'll be able to get a bit of a flavor for some of the content that Bill is creating. Anyway, without further ado, thank you so much for listening in, and hopefully we'll see you again back on The Business Strategist. Take care, and we'll speak to you soon. Cheers now.